After nearly 10 years, Stranger Things has finally come to an end, a series that I consider to be Netflix's flagship show, continually growing in popularity since its release. The point of captivation for Stranger Things has always been its small town charm, with a nostalgic throwback to the 80s and a world that has direct parallels to D&D, which is used to carry the storyline forward. However, the unique elements of the show that made it so lovable in the past just didn't feel like enough to counter the issues that this season presented. While there has been a ton of negativity surrounding Season 5, and with good reason, I think there's been some exaggeration with saying this was the worst finale ever, because trust me when I say I'm familiar with bad finales. Still, Season 5 is easily the worst one by far, and everything that the show had been building up to ultimately had an anticlimactic and fairly disappointing conclusion. Now, on my first watch, I actually enjoyed the finale. The 30-minute epilogue at the end, while it was a bit long, had some good character moments that felt raw, emotional, and a little sappy, which I felt the rest of the season was deprived of. But since quite a bit of time has passed, I can't help but feel like the finale and overall final season of such a big show should have packed a bigger punch. Time and time again, we'd seen Ellie use her powers to defeat some type of evil, whether it be a Demogorgon, a monster controlled by the Mind Flayer, Vecna. Each time she continues to push her limits as she grows stronger, culminating in what you might expect to be a high-stakes battle in the abyss, but, well, unfortunately not. The final fight had so much potential. We got bits and pieces of what it could look like from previous seasons, and none of them felt unsatisfying until now, which honestly makes no sense because a final face-off against Vecna was the most highly anticipated encounter of the season. The battles preceding this one were all done with such a high degree of intensity and emotion that I didn't expect anything less, but those qualities were all severely lacking here. And I think this can mainly be credited to the fact that it doesn't feel like anyone's life is actually at risk, and thus the ending also does not feel earned. I like the idea of everyone flanking the Mind Flayer from multiple sides, and even though I think that was the most reasonable plan, I still felt like the final fight wasn't drawn out enough, or that the stakes weren't high enough. The failure to evoke a sense of urgency and intensity within the season can mainly be drawn back to one thing, and that's the way Stranger Things writes their characters. The character dynamics in Stranger Things is one of my favorite parts of the show, which was often one of the saving graces if there were other parts of the season that fell flat. For example, I personally love Season 3 despite there being a huge tonal shift. The characters transition from fighting an evil contained within Hawkins to then having that expand outside to Russia, which was a bit of a jarring change. However, I would say that this season had a lot of crucial character development, not just individually, but also interpersonally. There was a lot of screen time dedicated to Max and Al, allowing Al specifically to connect with someone other than Mike, who was really the only person we got to see her spend a comparable amount of time with next to Hopper. Through their friendship, Elle was able to develop more personal autonomy, forming her own ideas on Mike's behavior towards her, and then slowly gravitating towards him after they break up, which was a choice made by her own will, and not solely because that's how things have always been. All of this only for their reunion to lack any real emotion after Max has been in a coma for almost 2 years. Even Will and Max's reunion was more acknowledged, though they didn't have a relationship that was anywhere near as well established as Max and Elle's. And to circle back to Mike, him and Elle's relationship became noticeably flat this season. I thought that this could have been due to a lack of chemistry, but there was a very limited amount of scenes to reinforce their connection that was more evident in previous seasons, which made their final goodbye lose some of the emotional impact for me. I'm sure the relationship has gained stability after the issues they encountered as a couple in season 4, but at the very least, I feel like it would have made sense for Mike to say "I love you" back to Elle in the end. There was an entire subplot before where Mike struggled to express his feelings properly, so that was a little detail I thought could have been easily fixed. One of the other big issues that this show has is plot armor, and a lot of it. 5 seasons of these characters existing in this extremely dangerous world, and somehow none of the main cast was killed. There have been countless times where characters are thought to be dead and should have died, but by some miracle managed to survive. I mean, this late into the show, we still have fake-out deaths that are a bit of an eye-roll moment at this point. The exception to this being the only person who constantly had to self-sacrifice to save her friends, family, and the residents of Hawkins since season 1. A central part of Elle's backstory is the cyclic pattern of abuse she endured. When she's first introduced, her path is already carved out. She was wired to become a weapon for the government, dehumanized as a result, and so a lot of Elle's character development stemmed from self-discovery. In Season 4, Elle has a plot dedicated to her regaining her powers by uncovering lost memories. This presented a chance for her to find out who she really was. For a long time, Elle held onto the idea that her powers made her a freak or a monster, coming to the realization during the Nina project that Dr. Brenner was the real monster, someone who continued to use and manipulate Elle until his last few moments. So when she's able to confront him and later walk away from him when he asks for her understanding, it was an extremely powerful moment for Elle as she continues to form her own identity outside the ones that others have tried to force onto her. And while I don't think Season 5 completely undid everything that the previous 4 seasons built, with Holly having a major part in the story and Will having newfound powers, it seemed like the Duffer Brothers just didn't really know what to do with her character anymore, and were potentially a bit distracted by the other character plots until she came back in the end to help defeat Vecna. In addition to Elle, it's become difficult for some of the original cast to find a solid role within the story, but the ensemble itself has continued to expand past its limits, forcing the storylines of some characters to fall flat. The characters are usually split into distinct groups with their own individual plot, where they all come together in the end. At some point, though, the importance of these separate storylines became increasingly disproportionate. For example, in Season 4 with the California and Russian prison plot compared to Elle's time with the Nina project. But this season differed a bit in the sense that the cast felt much more grouped together, and it put into perspective just how big the cast is. By the end of the show, it feels like we have many characters that are partially developed, rather than having invested more time into furthering the development of central characters. Right from the start, we were thrown into the action with the group planning another crawl, and key bits of information were being given to the viewers. The plot uses characters to progress forward, but kind of forgets about actually exploring said characters in more depth, with a few exceptions in mind. There's a strong disconnect between some of the characters, but also their reactions to the events in the show. If the group's plan failed, there would be world-ending consequences, but that doesn't really translate into a strong sense of urgency. Like Will says in episode 8, they're not afraid of Vecna anymore, but that's the thing. They don't fear death or the unknown anymore because, well, they know basically everything there is to find out about Vecna and the Mind Flayer. There was nothing to catch them by surprise when they traveled into the abyss besides the Mind Flayer, nothing to really challenge them, which, I mean, this could have been solved by having some demogorgons and bats and those little tendrils present instead of Vecna just not expecting a fight on his home turf. Something that made Stranger Things gain a lot of traction initially was the mystery elements, not knowing what evil existed in Hawkins yet and slowly uncovering the truth. That was a constant throughout the show, except this last season, which I'm not mad at considering they had to wrap up said mysteries introduced previously. However, I wish that the show had continued to lean into the horror elements presented in Season 4 instead. Where the plot stops introducing mysteries, it could have been made up for with more action in the finale, or building off of said elements. With a show this big that's lasted almost 10 years, I do expect that naturally it will have character and plot issues that come up, and this is something that isn't even exclusive to Season 5, but is much more apparent here when parts of the world building and plot were getting wrapped up, and it was noticeable how the Duffer Brothers failed to fully deliver. I feel like shows like Stranger Things weren't made with the intention of becoming as big as it did, and that's why Season 3 starts to feel like the beginning of a completely different show, and Season 1 has remained the season to beat for its entire run. I'm glad that I got to watch and enjoy most of the show, but I'll also say I'm really glad that it's over. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video explaining some of my thoughts on the season. If you have any more thoughts, feel free to share them below. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time. Bye!